Hey y'all, coming on in. I'm so glad you're here. This is the Becoming You Through Him series. I'm your host, Aaliyah J. Thomas. Before we even jump in, go ahead and grab some tea. If you're a person that likes to take notes, go ahead and get a pen and a journal and jump right on into my becoming. When I set out and I wrote my devotional, Becoming You Through Him, I had to, just a week ago, I was like, you know what? I think I need to create a series to getting them to understand more so about the becoming. And, my becoming wasn't this like glitz and glamour thing. My becoming started in grief. So I think in everybody's becoming journey, there's the call, right? So is simply God showing you a version of yourself when you are in your becoming, or you have become the version that He's calling you to be. And when I saw that version of myself, I was like, whoa, whoa, like, God, you love me that much to put me in that position. And I also remember feeling like scared and insecure because I knew then that I didn't have the qualities to possess who that woman was in this version, or in this vision that God was showing me. And the very thing that shifted me into my becoming even more was different series of grief. Okay, so when I was pregnant with my oldest back in 2020, March of 2020, so the world had literally just shut down, like, when I had her. When I was pregnant with her, in my second trimester, my aunt died. My aunt passed away on my father's side of the family, and it's not that many of us, so it was like very, I guess you could say, jarring, and I wasn't really able to process it because I didn't want to feel very intense emotions while being pregnant. So fast forward, my third trimester, the same week I'm like literally like having contractions and stuff like that. It's funny because my due date for my oldest was actually my father's birthday, April 5th. So it's crazy because the same week I'm having contractions with her, I get a phone call from my father's side of the family, and they called me to say my father passed away. They had, I guess they was looking for him. My aunt ended up doing a wellness check, and he was deceased, and he had been deceased for quite some time. So it was COVID at that time, so no one was rushing to do an autopsy and like figure out what was his cause of death. But I ended up going into labor within 24 hours of receiving that call. And I had my daughter, and I was literally like back in virtual class like that Monday. I went to labor Thursday, had her on Friday, was back in virtual class on Monday. And for me, I struggled with this big identity shift because, to know me is to know me. Like, I am a go-getter. If you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it anyway. And, I was dealing with a lot of identity shifts at that time because it was so many different things or so many different people that was like counting against me. And, once I came home with my baby, I couldn't even fully like process my grief because, I was like smack dead in the middle of being a mom, so we fast forward a little bit, and, now I have to make a decision of if I'm going to go back to work or not. And God told me to leave my job. He told me to leave my job. And I struggled with that. This was like my first like big girl job after like graduating college, and I really did not want to leave my job. So I tried my best to like work with them. I knew I couldn't work my 3 to 11 shift that I had prior to going on leave, but I was like, look, like, maybe we can make something work, right? They was not willing to work with me at all. So I remember God coming back to me and being like, I didn't tell you to do that. I did not tell you to do that. I told you to leave. So I ended up putting in my resignation. And it's funny because, like, so many people doubted my decision of wanting to leave. But, like, it was so many people that passed judgment towards my decision. But no one, like, you know, gave concern into, like, no concern or no support, and like, okay, well, how are you going to do X, Y, and Z? It was just a lot of judgment at that time, and I just couldn't understand why there were so many different relationships in my life that just seemed to be falling apart. So I was going through like boundary issues with my mom and my sister, with some friends, and my partner. You know, being a mom directed my boundaries, because when you become a mom, is like you start to realize like what you have capacity for and what you don't have capacity for, and the boundaries or the lack thereof that I did not have at that time put a lot of my relationships on like unsteady ground. And you know, I had to really understand what that meant in order for me to get the support that I needed in the relationship. And I started to realize that, you know, I had a lot of unrealistic expectations for many people in my life. So I had to put some things in place in order for me to start making a change. You know, I tried to voice plenty of times that I was going to do postpartum depression. But when you start like navigating grief and postpartum, and you're trying to tell the people around you that like, I'm not okay, I'm in a dark place, and they just don't hear you, you start to just isolate yourself. You start to withdraw from them. And that's exactly what I did. Like, the more pushback I got, it basically taught me that I needed to stay to myself and stay to God ultimately. And that's basically what I ended up doing. And that trajectory ended up costing me so much time of like not having my voice when I needed it, right? So this takes me to Psalms 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Because at that time I didn't know that, like, you know, my grief was at the center of my becoming. You know, 6 months postpartum, I left my job. You know, resigned from working on a psychiatric ward, and then a month later, my baby was like 7 months. I breastfed up until 2 years, but you know, when you're breastfeeding, you don't necessarily get a period. So I started bleeding. I was bleeding for like 14 days. Go to the hospital. I was in like very severe pain. They're like, oh, you're pregnant. They do an ultrasound. It's an ectopic pregnancy. So right at the start of me understanding that like I was gonna have to start processing my grief, I'm being basically wheeled into the surgery room. And it was something that probably even ended up prolonging me processing my grief, because now there was this potential baby. And then on top of that, they ended up having to take one of my tubes for said, you know, unviable fetus. And that was a lot to process. But all of that was, you know, God's isolation into really trajecting me into my becoming. You know, it was grief of myself, my identity, my self-worth, my own voice. It was the grief of my relationships not being where they were due to not having the boundaries I needed to support the ideal relationships I desired. And then, you know, unraveling the grief and the dynamics between, you know, my father and that side of the family. You know, so you know everything, everybody sees like the glow up, but nobody really sees that, the behind the scenes of, when God is actually breaking you to, get you to where you need to be, right? And this takes me to 1 Peter 5:10. After you have suffered a little while, he will restore you. This kind of takes me to delve deeper into, the silence, me setting my boundaries, the loss of my job identity and not knowing what I really wanted to do. I mean, I was still in school to become a therapist. I mean, I still had like a year and a half out. But there was this like spiritual hunger that began to rise in me. Like I really wanted to start becoming closer to God. So I said, you know what? I'm going to be very intentional about how I am praying, right? I'm going to I remember going to TJ Maxx and getting these like red leather journals. I was like, I'm gonna start praying. I'm gonna put you know, dear God. I would do these like letters to God every day. So I'm gonna do it every day. I'm being to I'm gonna do it every day. And I put, dear God, I would thank God for everything that he was doing in my life, what he was moving. And, at that time, very heavily, I prayed for knowledge, wisdom, and discernment. Like, that was my prayer. Even to this day, I still pray for that. But I definitely needed it then. So, I prayed probably for 3 months, and then I stopped, right? And then I'm like, you know what? I started getting an influx of, because at this time, I think I was, like, in the middle of my practicum, and I was taking, like, like, practice clients. So I'm in the middle of my practicum, and I'm like, you know what? I gotta get some, like mental health journals, because I don't really have any. Like, if I give a client homework, I want to be able to give them homework from somewhere, right? So I end up ordering these two journals, like workbooks, and it said one was gonna come on Friday, one was gonna come on Saturday. Well, Friday comes, and two packages get delivered from Amazon. So I go downstairs and I grab the packages and I open them, and like one of the books that was delivered wasn't what I ordered. So I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh well, maybe like a neighbor's package came and I opened it by mistake. No, my name was on it. And the book was called Anonymous, Jesus' Hidden Years and Yours. And I just found this to be like so profound, especially at that time. So I'm like, I'm investigating the label and everything, and I'm like, this is like weird, because like on the packaging slip, it said my name, my address, and it had a different like tracking number than the other book that got delivered, right? But if you like peeled back that label that had my name on it, there was somebody else's name there, as if like that person ordered the book, but then God wanted it to come specifically to me, so it came to me. And I said, well, maybe it was like a fluke in Amazon system. If the other book I ordered don't come tomorrow, then yeah, it's just a fluke. Well, lo and behold, the other book that I ordered definitely ended up coming on Saturday. And all three packages all had different tracking numbers. They all had different tracking numbers. So this book, Anonymous, Jesus' Hidden Years and Yours, it talks about how, Jesus was set apart, how he was in this season of isolation. And when we come to know Jesus, like in the Bible, he's 30. Well, where was Jesus before he turned 30, And I just thought it was so profound. And it was a confirmation. It was truly a confirmation at that time for me that, God was doing what he needed to do. And I truly feel like anytime I'm doubting myself or I'm going through something, God finds a way to send me a message. He always does. He always finds a way to send me a message, right? So some homework that I want you guys to consider But for the next episode, you don't have to do all three, but you can pick which one is best for you. Okay? So, journal question: what glimpse has God shown me that I keep ignoring because it feels too big? What glimpse has God shown me that I keep ignoring because it feels too big? You know, like I said, my journey started with that vision that God showed me, you know, who he was calling me to be, but it felt so big that I felt like I wasn't going to be able to get to that point. Because when looking at that woman, it felt like there were certain qualities that she had that I did not at that time. So consider that question. Scripture will be Jeremiah 1:5. You're going to just read it for the next couple of mornings. Then I want you to self-reflect. What are 3 areas that God separated you, and what did that season teach you? And, you know, as I've said, like, this is the call, like the calling, but you also have to understand that there's going to be the weight of the call. And I think when Jesus calls people, sometimes the weight of the call can be so unbearable that they choose not to answer. So I will walk you through me understanding the weight of the call in the next episode, because that is where everything changed for me. If you take anything from today's session, is really just understanding that, you know, being set apart is a part of the becoming. You have to understand that there are going to be things that you definitely have to let go and let God in order for you to reach the breakthrough that you're looking for. Me being in an isolation period was not easy. It was not easy. There were, you know, excruciating times where I had to choose, okay, am I going to grieve today, or am I going to function today? And sometimes it's very tricky trying to navigate that when you are in a period or in a season of being isolated, because being set apart is not easy. And, you know, just understanding that, you know, this being set apart is something that God also experienced. You know, it definitely gave me a sense of comfort, understanding that, you know, in my own journey of understanding who God is, it's allowing me to see him more. You know, sometimes it's not always about the word, but it's more so about God's character. Okay. So I will be looking forward to seeing you guys in part 2, where I'll be talking about the weight of the call. Okay. Bye-bye.